Hey, everybody, welcome back. We hope that you have on your flippy floppies, your sandals, your spring footwear, because we are kicking it with some of the coolest people in the neighborhood, in the Wichita neighborhood. Well, first of all, before we get to him, Hannah, how are you, friend?
Doing great, Malpal. We are, hitting that spring season here, and I am ready to kick it with you guys today. I'm pretty pumped about our guest today because this is some stuff we will really need to know. So I can't wait until we get into it.
We're going to kick it with some more, with some Dr. Solomon Moore. How you doing, buddy?
Drum tap or whatever it's called, right? I don't
Drum roll.
That's right. That's
I
right.
love it. And I'm only calling you S'more from now on.
It's more. Do you
Uh-huh.
want more?
That is my email at school, so
It works.
And it's everybody's favorite campfire treat.
very true.
Have you guys ever had a s'more with a Reese's peanut butter cup instead of the Hershey's chocolate?
Oh, no.
I have not, but somebody mentioned that a while back actually.
Mind blow. It's
Yeah, 'cause I
delicious.
love Reese's peanut butter.
Uh-huh. So that's your homework before our next podcast, everybody.
Wow.
Try a s'more with a different kind of chocolate than a Hershey. It's very good.
Dang.
Very good. Okay, so speaking of very good, Solomon Moore, Dr. Moore, you wear so many hats and you do such a great job doing so many things. Tell us all about you, who you are, where you came from. We want to know some more about you.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. So I guess my main identity, I would say professionally, is a school counselor in Wichita Public Schools at the North High School. So shout out to my Wichita North peeps. I love it there. And I also am the legislative, or no, not legislative, I'm sorry. That's another
You could be a
organization's
legislator.
position. I mean, it really is, but advocacy, sorry, not legislative advocacy, advocacy and leadership chair for CASCA, the Kansas School Counselor Association. I am also a full-time counselor educator at Culver Stockton College and am the chair of the school counseling program there.
And
And
where is that?
it is in Canton, Missouri, which is on the Mississippi River and right across from Illinois, the Illinois border. So
Oh,
I do
cool.
that virtually or remotely from Wichita, but I do teach labs in person in the summer. So, but otherwise it's a remote position. But I love it. I love teaching future school counselors, so it's been exciting to do that. And then I also work with both of my amazing pals that are on here for KSDE as a counselor leader consultant. So yeah, I definitely like to stay busy apparently.
You do, and you do such a great job at all of those things. And tell us where you grew up. Are you a Kansan? Are you from another state? Talk to us about that, your
Yeah, I
background.
am a Kansan. So I grew up mostly in Pittsburgh, Kansas. I was born in Fort Scott, but which is really weird. It's like 30 minutes north of Pittsburgh just because of like the hospital insurance stuff. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so it's kind of random that I was born there. But yeah, I grew up mostly in Pittsburgh, Kansas. My dad's side of the family is from Neosho, Missouri, like 15 minutes from Joplin. So, if you don't know, most people know where that is now because of the tornado, unfortunately. But so my dad's side was there, so I spent time there as well. But yeah, definitely a Kansan.
Very cool. And where did you get your education?
I went to undergrad at Pittsburgh State University, go Gorillas, and then I moved to Wichita for my first teaching position and went to grad school for counseling at Wichita State. And then I got a educational specialist degree in counseling from the University of Missouri. And then I just completed my PhD in counselor education supervision last May. So actually, it's coming up on a year, which is kind of crazy. It doesn't seem like it's been that
So
long.
cool. So cool. And what is so cool about all of the counselors, everybody is connected. And I actually met Solomon through Matthew McLean, who is from Colorado. And Solomon knew many other different Kansas school counselors. So it's just so cool how everybody is weaved together and connected like that. So, with your role with Casca, tell us how to do that. How do you advocate? How do you take that first step? What does it mean to advocate? Talk to us all about that.
That's a great question. That's also a very big question. So I'll start with kind of the why. And honestly, I will say, and actually, let me even back up before that. I think that probably, this is my own experience, but I'm guessing that it's probably similar for a lot of us, that sometimes we kind of get thrown into advocacy by way of things that we become involved in or become passionate about. So I think that that kind of naturally will end up leading itself to advocacy. And so specifically with our profession, right, as school counselors, that is part of our role. And actually, ethically, it's part of our role as well as in the professional behaviors and standards that we have for our profession. They mandate us to be advocates there as well. So kind of full circle, right, within that um, national model and our role. So I would say that kind of the background of that and why we do that is, and I even have a few points that I just want to read because I didn't want to forget to talk about it. So when we look at, and I'm not going to bore everyone with like all the minute details, right? We can all read those, but just kind of a short, brief overview. ASCA does outline before we even get into all the specific ethical standards, just an overall kind of model or framework for operating ethically and for what our role is as professional school counselors is to respect and treat all students with dignity, all people, which obviously comes from the counseling ethical standards from ACA as well, to provide a physically and emotionally safe, inclusive, and healthy school. We all know that. That means free from bullying, free from harassment and discrimination, equitable access to a school counseling program, and that also they also specifically delineate students historically and currently marginalized by the education system. So I think that's important to note that there is specific language in there for marginalized groups of students, which we'll circle back to later. And then I also want to point out that the some of the specific populations that they mention in the ethical standards at the beginning, and those are that we advocate and affirm all students regardless of ethnic and racial identity, nationality, age, social class, abilities and disabilities, language, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, family type, religious or spiritual identity, living situations, homelessness, or incarceration. So I know that's a lot, but I wanted to say that because I think it's important for us to think about all the different groups of students that we're talking about. Because I think also when we mention advocacy, I think probably our minds go to groups that we see often and maybe things that are more prevalent in the media at specific times, depending on what's going on, right, in our society or in our world. But really, I think there are some things that maybe are not as um, maybe we want to say in our face or apparent, so to speak. And so sometimes I think maybe we don't think about that. So thinking about like living situations, even spiritual identity is maybe one that we don't think about in advocacy as often. Incarceration or incarcerated parents. I mean, we're thinking about all these different experiences that students have and how that can impact them academically and in the school setting, and then also advocating for them and what they need. And obviously, all of this goes back to we all know Maslow, right? Maslow before you bloom. We hear that all the time. But it really is so true that students' basic needs have to be met before we can move up that pyramid. And of course, we want to eventually get to self-actualization, right? So, kind of a brief background of the why. Also, in our ethical standards, there's a whole entire section on
Mhm.
working with marginalized populations. So, an entire standard A10 that talks about that. And it begins with, I want to point this out, it begins with the word advocate, literally, the whole section. So, I think that obviously we know based on our ethical standards and our role and our professional behaviors and competencies that advocacy is super important. And the reason being for that is we have students that need access, equitable access to all programs within the school setting, but also resources outside of school. And sometimes, especially in rural areas and in rural communities, sometimes the school counselor might be the only access that students have to mental health services. And
Mhm.
that has been shown in the research, and I'm sure that we can all have all seen that in some of our experiences as well, professionally and personally. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
mean,
think that
growing
it's
up in a
important
small town,
to,
that was what it was. And Mallory can probably
Mm-hmm.
attest to that too, growing up in small town America.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think, considering all of those things, obviously we could talk about more, but just kind of giving a brief basis for why advocacy is important in order to help our students social and emotionally, academically, and with their post-secondary success, right? Which is, obviously that is the main purpose and goal of K-12 education, but we know that that's not the only component, right? We also have to take care of their holistic wellness, which includes
Mm-hmm.
their social and emotional wellness as well. And so I think that it's important to keep in mind that in order to do that, we have to help advocate for not only access, but also another piece too is dismantling these systems that are discriminating against some groups of students and or oppressing them and their families, right? Not just them, but their families also. And something that I tell, sorry, and I'm kind of getting like on my soapbox now, but something that I always tell my grad students when we talk about, especially when I teach multicultural counseling, when we in the school counseling courses, really in every course I teach probably, but because we always end up talking about advocacy. But I always tell them, yes, it's great to help empower our students and our clients and teach them coping skills and empower them for advocating for themselves. But that can only go so far when you have a system that is there, that is built to discriminate and oppress them and keep them down, right? They can only, only so much coping skills can go so far with that. And then it's like, what do I do, right? I'm beating my head against this wall that I can't get past. And so that I kind of use as like a visual of here is why we also have to engage in advocacy on behalf of and for our students and clients in order to help dismantle some of these systems and make it more equitable for everyone.
And I think too, sometimes depending on what level you are, that gets really hard. And with the world that we're living in, that can be really difficult, especially when you have, all these people coming at you. You got parents, you got other stakeholders, you have staff, and everybody has their own beliefs.
Yep.
Hmm.
And so you really have to remember all of those different ethics that we have as school counselors. And remember, all means all. We had a
Hmm.
podcast. Oh gosh, this was one of the first ones that we had, and Hannah and I talked about bullying, especially at the elementary level. Yes, we are advocating for the person that's being bullied, but we also have to advocate for the bully because they're one of our kids too. And so, what does that look like when things sometimes get really difficult?
And
Yeah, that's very true. Oh yeah, go ahead, Hannah. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we talk about obviously, first and foremost, we are advocating for our students. And like you said, access and meeting their needs is so important. But on the flip side of things, we also have to think about advocacy for ourselves because we also have to advocate for our profession. Sometimes people have to advocate for their job. Like people are making cuts and they're like, I'm a counselor. Hear me roar. I need you to see why. And so we have to think about that piece too. So it's a big ball that is all intertwined of all these things that we got to advocate for those kiddos, we got to advocate for our profession, for others, we have to advocate for ourselves. And so, all that being said, where do we start?
How do we do it?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, and agreed, Hannah. Thank you for bringing that up with role of the school counselor. My automatically when I talk about advocacy and especially right now in our current kind of socio-political climate, I think about advocacy for and with individuals and marginalized groups, but definitely our role also. That is an important piece of our professional responsibilities too, and advocating for a role. We could do a whole episode right on using data and how that can impact advocacy for our role and educating stakeholders. And I think that the same can be said for advocating for students' needs as well. So, I mean, that's very similar in that piece of educating stakeholders, right? But yes, so back to your question of the why or how, I'm sorry, of the how. I think that probably one way I kind of want to conceptualize this too, that I think makes it more digestible to think about and also to be able to reflect on where we're at in our advocacy work is using the ACA advocacy competencies like visual aid, that infographic, because it really demonstrates in a nice, easy to see visual way the levels of advocacy, the continuum, and the types or the domains. So just really quickly, if we conceptualize it using that, then there's micro level advocacy, there's meso level advocacy, and there's macro. And it's a continuum, right? So micro is on the individual level for and with the student or the client. So either we're doing it for them and on behalf of, or we're doing it with them and empowering them. Then meso level is where we get into more of the systemic piece. So if we think about the school system, that could be our building procedures and policies, or multiple groups of students within the building. That could be district level. Also, that could be our community as well. Community collaboration with that would be more the meso level, and then the macro level is where we get into the socio-political advocacy, the public arena. And actually, it's really interesting that the research shows that a lot of our advocacy work as professional school counselors is in the micro level, which you're shaking your heads, right? Like I can agree with
Mhm.
that too, based
Yep.
on my experience. Like we see that, we do that a lot. It naturally comes with the territory. The meso level, somewhat, depending, I think, on kind of back to Mal's point on individuals, on school counselors' comfortability, maybe with advocacy and how to navigate that. And maybe that comes with education and training, maybe that comes with years of experience, right, et cetera, multiple factors. And then macro level is actually as of right now in the research, the least engaged in type of advocacy. But I would argue that it's the most important, if not most, equally important, obviously, right? But that's probably where we're going to make the most impact because we know that when, legislation that comes out, laws, state laws, federal laws, that has a trickle down impact to our school, to our state departments of education, our school districts, our school buildings, and our students. And so I think that that's a huge endeavor that we need to engage in and get more confident with and more comfortable with. So definitely I would like to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to just kind of give that framework because I think it's easier for people to understand when they hear that language and kind of conceptualize that in that way.
Yeah, that
And
gives us a good,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that gives us a good place to start, a good reference point too, especially if we know that all of our efforts are in this tiny realm and really we need to be more focused on how can we make some bigger strides. I think even for me personally, sometimes that seems like scary, right? Like when it's legislation and things like that, I hear that come up and they're like, okay, write testimony, reach out to your legislators, do these things. I'm like, yeah. I would love to do this. How do I do those things? And
Mhm.
so sometimes, like Casca does a nice job of they'll send out, and it's probably from you, Solomon. We get these emails that tell us what bills are in the legislation and things to be on the lookout for. And then they'll say, reach out. I'm like, okay, cool. But where, right? So, is there an easy way that we could start to get into some of these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, probably a majority of those advocacy emails do come from our committee, from the advocacy
Awesome.
You're doing
committee.
your job.
Great job. Yeah. It's
Doing your
good. It's
job.
great to know because I feel very informed, which I appreciate, but then I want to know like, okay, what are my next steps? What are my actionable items? Boxes to check.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think that is normal. I think at least in my experience, I didn't have a class on advocacy in grad school, or, I don't even remember having a module on specifically how to advocate at the macro level like that. And
Mhm.
so, obviously that would be important, right, for counselor educators to know. But yeah, I think it's normal to kind of not know, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that we all start somewhere, and this would be a great platform right now, right, on our podcast to help our Kansas professional school counselors to kind of be more informed and feel more confident in that. I would Here are some easy things to do. So, submitting testimony for bills, if we think about the legislature as one piece of that, you can submit written testimony where you can just email it, which is super easy to do. You can submit in-person testimony where you go and testify in person, which obviously probably, if we compare the two, is more powerful, but also not as doable for some people. And so that's totally okay. But submitting written testimony, especially if we have hundreds of people that are submitting written testimony, that sends a powerful message to the
And
committee or to the legislators.
Got a question for you on that. So when you submit written testimony, do we just email somebody? Is it a PDF? Do we have to handwrite it? How do we do that?
Yeah, great question. So there is, for each committee, they actually have different rules for submitting testimony. Most of them are kind of similar, but it could be like, 24 hours versus 48 hours before the hearing is set, or, specific like formatting. And speaking of formatting, I found that even when a committee has a specific format that you're supposed to follow, I've looked at other written testimony and not everyone follows the format and they've still accepted it. So, I think that's more of maybe a guideline, but definitely the deadlines, like for example, for the Senate Committee on Education in Kansas, the deadline is 24 hours by the day before the hearing. So 24 hours in advance of the hearing is the deadline for submitting written testimony. And so that is definitely important because they won't accept it. It will not get included with the testimony they submit to the committee if it's not done on time. So those things are super important. And you can find all of that information on the specific committee's website. So if you go, for example, to the Kansas legislature's website, you can go to Senate or House, and you can find, the House Committee on Education, the Senate Committee on Education, the Ways and Means Committee, et cetera, whatever committee you're looking for. And it'll have the link on their homepage of their committee, the guidelines for submitting testimony, and you'll be able to find all that. It's actually super easy once you know how to get there and navigate that. And the Casca advocacy page has links to those things, as well as the ASCA actually has an advocacy toolkit that's really amazing and has a lot of resources as well. So my advice would be to look at the Casca advocacy page, the legislative advocacy page on the Casca website, and then also the ASCA advocacy toolkit website page. Those would be my two starting points if it were me. That has tons of information to help us. And then also you can actually, which I have done, and obviously as the advocacy chair for Casca, I kind of need to stay informed as much as possible, right? So I signed up for the RSS feed for all the bills that get introduced. The only downside to that is that
How
it's
many
all
emails do
or
you
nothing.
get?
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say.
it's an all or nothing. Like you can't sign up for specific committees that are, more pertinent to your work than others. It's all or nothing. So I
But I
get,
also think that's okay to
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
knowledge of those.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. So, if you do want to stay more abreast, I think that is a great way to go. And there is a link to on the Kansas legislators page. And in fact, you could just search probably in the their little search box RSS feed, and it'll take you to it. But it gives you step-by-step directions on how to do that. It's too much for me to explain on the podcast.
Sure. Or if
But
you
'cause
send us the link, we can put it in the show notes. We could do that too.
yeah, oh yeah, I could totally do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
Anything you
yeah,
want linked, we'll toss it in there.
okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll toss all those links in there then. But yeah,
And
so you can sign up to do that, which is great. Just know it's kind of an all or nothing that so you'll get lots of
and
notifications.
Solomon, you talk about, you know, giving testimonies and written testimonies. How do I know who to send it to?
Yeah, another great question. So when it's introduced in committee, obviously you're wanting to send it to that committee. So for example, when we worked on submitting testimony for Senate Bill 76, that was the Senate Committee on Education that they were hearing that, and so it went to that. And actually then it passed in the Senate Committee on Education, and then it went to the House Committee on Education. So when you're submitting testimony, you're submitting it to that committee. And when you go, like I said earlier, when you go to the homepage and it gives you sorry, I talk with my hands, when it gives you the,
We love it.
when it gives you the specific uh, guidelines and rules for submitting testimony, it tells you exactly who to send it to. So typically it's the committee, like the committee has an email that you send it to, and typically you'll start out your testimony with introducing yourself and then giving, kind of a thank you for your time and being able to submit testimony to the chair, whoever the chair is of the committee. So, but it'll give you all those guidelines on the homepage of those committees. Now, That is one piece. That's when bills are actually uh, being I shouldn't say enacted, being heard in committee and then potentially being voted on the Senate or House floor if they pass in the committee. But if we're talking about we just want to advocate with our legislators on issues that we feel are super important to us, and there's not necessarily a bill at the time regarding that specific issue, but we want our legislators to hear from us, that would be where when we would want to send them an email, perhaps try to call them and maybe set up a time to have a phone meeting. You could set up a Zoom, Google Meets, whatever, a virtual meeting with them. You could meet in person. So those would be times where you would just reach out to your legislator and say, hey, I really want to talk about this issue that's important to me. So that's kind of a separate thing from written testimony, but obviously just as powerful and advocating for our students, for our communities that way. And that's super easy to do too. You can find, in fact, on the Casca advocacy page, sorry, I can't talk, on that legislative and advocacy page on the Casca website, there is the Find Your Legislator link. So that's super easy to do. If you go to the Kansas legislature's website, there's on the left-hand side on that homepage, find your legislator link as well. So super easy to do. If you don't know who your legislators are, you can use those links to find them. And then it gives you their email address, their phone number to contact them. And you can take it from there, but it's actually pretty easy to do once you have that information. And it didn't really take me very long to set up some Zoom meetings with my legislators. I didn't necessarily want to travel to Topeka. Not that I wouldn't, but it was easier. And in fact, it was probably easier for both of us, right? It was probably
Mhm.
easier for them as well. So maybe that would even be a way to meet with them that they could squeeze you into their schedule a little bit easier also. But it really wasn't as difficult as I thought the first time that I met with some legislators via Zoom and talked to them about some things that I had concerns about and wanted to advocate for. So I think that once we know how to get that information, it makes it a lot easier.
I agree. And I will give so this is my helpful hint. I submitted my first testimony ever. Hadn't done it before, did it this year, and I was like, okay, what do I do? So your girl went to ChatGPT and we said, here's the format because Solomon had sent that out and he said, this is the format it needs to be in. And I was like, great. So I plopped that, I wrote kind of what I wanted it to say, plopped the format. I said, make sure it's in this format. Beautiful. So there are a lot, even if you're nervous, I think you can find some ways to still advocate like that. I mean, you're not
Mhm.
sure what to say. Ask ChatGPT to give you some ideas. Say, hey, this is the bill that's up. Can I get some ideas for how I can write testimony for it? And it will. I mean, it's awesome. So you can use some things like that to help you out. And if that helps more counselors get out there and submit testimonies, let's do it.
Yeah. And I'm actually so happy that you brought that up, Hannah, because I actually had written that down that I wanted to mention that if you feel like you don't have the time, and honestly, that happens so often that these bills move so quickly through committees that sometimes it's like boom on a Thursday or a Friday, we see that Monday they're going to have the hearing for the bill. And so, we're scrambling because we want to submit testimony. And so I was actually going to mention that Chat GPT would be a great way to do that if you're pressed for time, if you're unsure exactly what to say. You kind of have the gist of what you want to say, but you need it to sound maybe more formal, or you want it to be bolstered a little bit. I think that's a great tool. Let's definitely use the tools that are at our disposal in order to more effectively advocate.
Working smarter, not harder.
Yes, definitely.
Very cool.
I also, just a couple other things to mention too. So beyond that piece of advocacy at the macro level, there's also joining in like organized events for different advocacy related topics or populations. We can also facilitate workshops and presentations because obviously education is a big piece of that as
Mhm.
well. Educating stakeholders, community members, that could be in our community, that could be at the state level, that could be regionally or nationally. And, when I say that, some people are like, oh my gosh, like, that sounds scary. And obviously we want to play to our strengths, right? And use our voice. when we feel confident and comfortable to do so. And so I think that, and that's something too that we don't have to do alone. We can do that in groups, and that can make us feel a little more comfortable and less anxious and make it less scary as well. But those are some other avenues of advocacy work also. And I just want to really quickly to talk about just some of the recent legislation in Kansas. This is not exhaustive by any means. These are just a few bills that impact our work with students. So there was Senate Bill 76, which was requiring school districts to use pronouns and names from birth certificates. So just an update on that. That was stricken from the calendar.
I love that word.
Yeah, stricken. I know, right?
Hi.
See ya.
That was stricken from the calendar. There was Senate Bill 87, which was expanding eligibility under the tax credit. So the voucher bill basically is what it kind of became known as. That was also stricken from the calendar. So there's that word again, Mal.
Hi.
There was House Bill 2034, which was authorizing school districts to employ chaplains as volunteers. Hasn't been enacted on. There has been no hearing. So at this point, we can kind of safely say it's died in committee. So
But that
no,
one has popped up at other times. Like that
yes.
popped up last year. And I mean, Solomon, this has happened in other states where it's that one I think counselors do need to be aware about because it's a sticky situation once that happens.
Hmm.
So what I've been reading from I think Texas and a couple other states when they've allowed chaplains to come in as volunteers, they have then later allowed them to almost take over the role of a if they have a school counselor position open, they'll say, "Well, we don't need a school counselor. We can just plop this chaplain in there," which has a lot of, that take it as you will. I've got my own thoughts on it. I'll keep them to myself. But, I think counselors need to be school counselors and not somebody else. So it's just a sticky sitch that we definitely that needs to be on the radar, even though there's no movement
Yes.
on it. Because it
Right.
keeps popping up and it keeps popping up in other states. So I
Mhm.
know we have people on here that listen from other states. Make sure you listen.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. That's an example of we definitely, I submitted testimony to the committee, even though a hearing wasn't scheduled. But that is an example of just reaching out to your legislators. You could also just send your position to the committee, but I sent mine to some of the specific, like the chair of the committee, and the minority leader in the committee, my own legislators, to let them know my stance on that. So I think that's an important way of doing that as well to hopefully mitigate things from going further that we don't want to if we feel like they're going to negatively impact students. Then there was also Senate Bill 254, which prohibits undocumented students from receiving any state or local public benefit. And so basically in Kansas, we really the only benefit that undocumented students have is receiving in-state tuition to universities. And so that would then not allow them to do that anymore. And so that does not have, at this point, it has not gone further. But again, that's something that needs to be on the radar, and definitely we need to be watching. And whatever your stance is, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your legislators on that as well. But really, I just wanted to provide you with some of the recent legislation that's happened or that is happening that impacts our work. And so obviously it's not exhaustive, there are others as well, and there's going to be more right throughout the legislative session that come up, but just giving you an idea of why it's important that we stay informed, because I think that's the other piece too, is that sometimes the school counselors, we're so busy, right? We know that we have so much going on. Most of us, all of us are overworked. We have huge caseloads. And so sometimes it can seem daunting to have another thing, especially maybe outside of the school day, but knowing how important it is and how it impacts what we do and impacts our students. So, I think that that's crucial for us to kind of understand the why behind that and be informed of what's going on as well, so that we can advocate.
And I think that's the a big piece too, is being a part of CASCA, being a part of your state association, being a part of ASCA, to know about these things and to have people on your side doing your job knowing about those things as well. And we're so lucky that we have an amazing Department of Education in Kansas with Kent Reed and Trish, and just knowing all of those things. So being a part of your state association is huge. It's priceless, even at $35 a year.
It's
Yeah,
worth
yeah, definitely worth it.
$35 just to stay up with all of this because I'll be
Mm-hmm.
honest, if I was not a Casca member, I don't know that I would
Mm-hmm.
have as much information as I do about what's going on in education and
Right.
things that, like you said, Solomon, directly affect us.
Yeah. And I think that both of you, that brings up another great point is that, if with that being said, understanding that school counselors are super busy and overwhelmed, like let us at Casca do the hard work for you and do some of the heavy lifting for you, for
Mm-hmm.
that very minimal $35 of being to be a member. You do get a lot of benefits, and one of those is we can help you stay informed where you don't necessarily have to feel like it's this huge daunting task and can see
Mm-hmm.
the updates that we send out and feel more confident and informed in what's going on too. So yeah, I think that's a great benefit of being a member.
Absolutely.
Solomon, I could see you at the state capitol. I could see you at the White House with your cute little suit and briefcase. Maybe that'll be your next job, Dr. Moore.
S'more.
Excuse me, s'more. Love it.
Never know. You never know where life's going to take you.
You know what? You are absolutely correct. Solomon, Dr. Moore, you've been amazing. Any final words for our listeners to advocate and just kind of walk away with?
I think my advice would be to just start small in whatever way feels doable for you, whether that's submitting written testimony, whether that's sending an email to a legislator, whether that's attending or helping, or even helping facilitate or set up an event. Using whatever your talents and skills are to help, because we need everybody, right? We need the people who are kind of out on the front lines, people who are okay and not afraid to do public speaking. We need people who can help set up things, contact people. So whatever your skill set is, utilizing that in the work for the greater good. And also not being afraid to ask questions, leverage your professional relationships with your organizations, your memberships, your colleagues, and we definitely can do this together a lot easier than we can't do it alone, right? Actually, I shouldn't say even a lot easier than we can alone. Like we need each other to do this incredible work for students and for our communities. And so having that connection too.
Well, it's kind of like a s'more, right? You got your graham cracker piece, you got your chocolate piece, you got your marshmallow, and then you need another graham, and you just put it together, and it's a delicious little treat, like advocacy can be.
And it would feel like we were missing something if we didn't have one of those. So you're right, Mallory.
Right.
We all have to work together.
I
It's like
love
building a
that.
s'more.
And
We
now I
need
want
to
to
get,
explore.
I know. Now we need to get you a shirt that says that.
S'more. Dr. S'more.
Dr. Schmore. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. And we always end on a fun question. So, Solomon, you are an active traveler. So, if you could travel anywhere right now, you had 5 minutes, pack a bag, go. Where would you go?
Oh my gosh. 5 minutes, pack a bag and go. That's a great question. There's so many things that popped into my mind when you said that. But honestly, I think that number one would be Glacier National Park.
Ooh, never been. I hear
I
it's
have been
awesome.
once, but I did not get to see everything, just saw the west side. So it was beautiful. I want to go back many times. It was awesome. So I think that is where I would go. Plus, when you're going to a national park and hiking and doing those things, you don't necessarily have to pack tons of stuff.
It's true.
You can always shop when you get there. That was my theory.
True. Yeah,
I
very
don't
true.
have it. I can go get it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your information. And if you have questions, listeners, reach out. If we
Yep.
don't know the answers, we're going to connect you with Solomon. We'll connect you with other people. But just like Solomon said, just ask. It's okay. We're all here for each other. We're all in this together. Mm-hmm. I don't know the rest of the words,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
we appreciate you all listening. Thank you for support of your support. And Solomon, thank you for all of your time and all of the amazing work that you do. You do such a great job in many different areas. So thank you so much.
Thank you.